I'm so grateful to be here, and this topic is either fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, near and dear to my heart. And I am very passionate about having hope in the healing from pornography addiction. So I'm going to start with my story. I met my husband on a houseboat in Lake Powell, a houseboat that was supposed to sleep 15 people, but somehow slept over 50 young single adults. Don't ask me how it worked. We went multiple times with this group, but somehow we always made it work. And people will always say, how in the world did you meet your husband on a houseboat in Lake Powell? Well, my girlfriend on the far right, her name's Heather. She was 25 at the time, getting her master's degree at the U. And she was like, I am not going to be the only girl who didn't just graduate from high school on this trip because, you know, they have that saying, the guys just keep getting older and the girls stay the same age. That was my husband and his high school buddies on this trip. They would always invite these girls that were like 18 or 19. And so since my friend Heather was 25, she invited me and a few other friends who were also in our mid-20s. And that's how I met my husband. So we became friends there. I became friends with all of his friends. And then that fall, we started dating. And we dated all through the fall and started falling in love. And I had this really awkward conversation with my mother-in-law, who I thought might be here today, but I don't see her. So I can be even more honest about this. But she said to me, you should just know that Neil dumps every girl he dates at the 3-month mark. And I kind of awkwardly laughed and was like, oh, thanks for telling me. But I thought to myself, that's not going to happen because he's never dated me. But sure enough, 3 months later and 3 days before Christmas, he dumped me. And I cried all through Christmas, and especially when that stupid 98 Degrees song, This Gift, would come on, I would just sob and sob. And so a couple of days after Christmas, I was sitting in this house, this cute little rental house that I lived in Holiday, Utah, and was feeling so sad. And I called him and I said, I just don't understand this. Like, I thought we were in love. I was the first girl he had said, I love you to, since high school. And I said, I think you owe me an explanation. He said, you know what? You're right. Let's go on a drive. So he came and picked me up from my cute little holiday house in the snow and drove me up to this beautiful lookout point. If you've ever been to, there's a big parking lot at the top of 3900 South in about Wasatch, and it overlooks the whole entire Salt Lake Valley. And I will never forget, as these snowflakes were softly falling onto his windshield, he turned to me and said, I have a problem with pornography. And I don't know what I thought he was going to say to me, but definitely not that. And he thought he was telling me so that I would say, well, peace out, have a nice life, nice knowing you, because he said, I'm in love with this girl and she deserves some closure. But that's not what happened. And instead, I heard this voice that just said, just listen. So I asked him to tell me more about his story. I just said, tell me more. So he started to tell me about how let me go back. When I heard that voice, I think I heard it because God wanted me to see him the way that he sees him. Not just the way that the world labels people who struggle with pornography addiction. And so, like this beautiful quote says, when you look at a person, any person, remember that everyone has a story. Everyone has gone through something that has changed them, and God sees this in everyone. And by the way, if you want to scan this QR code, then you can get all the slides if that's as a convenience to you. But anyway, so he started telling me about his story. This is my cute husband at about age 5. And this is about the time that he first saw pornography. And he told me that he started to really struggle with this in adolescence and through his teenage years. And then I do need to say this too, that we are members of the Church of Jesus Christ, but I really made an effort to tailor this to any faith, any belief system. But we do have to tell it from our perspective of, how we went through this. So he told me that he worked hard to get ready to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ and went out and served that mission. And he thought, I have done my duty, and now God is going to reward me with not struggling with this anymore. This is not going to be a problem. That's like the first myth, right? Is that if you do something, you'll earn the right to not be tempted anymore or not have a problem anymore. If you do enough other right things. But that's just not how addiction works. So within a couple of months, his addiction crept back into his life after returning from his mission, but this time with high-speed internet and a smartphone in his pocket everywhere he went. So that took us to the present day, and we got back together and started dating. And to make a very long 2-year courtship story a little bit shorter, we got engaged at about the year mark of when we got married. Of when we met. And then we got unengaged about 3 months later when I found out that he had been lying to me and relapsing. And then we started dating again. And can I just tell you how awkward it is to go from this is my boyfriend to this is my fiance to this is my I don't know what he is right now, then back to boyfriend. And then eventually we got re-engaged and he was my fiance again. And then around 2 years from when we met, we got married. And this was the most joyful day of my life. And I knew I had prayed multiple times about whether it was right for me to marry this man. And I knew that God had told me that it was the right thing for me to marry him. And we thought, this was myth number 2 for us, that getting married was going to make it all go away. As soon as we could be sexually active together, then he just wasn't going to have a problem with pornography, right? We had even had very well-meaning ecclesiastical leaders tell us, as soon as you get married, this problem is just going to go away. It's not even going to exist anymore. And we thought that was going to be true. But again, that is not how addiction works. And so within a couple of months, when real life showed up, so did his addiction. And this is one of the most important things that I learned through my recovery is that addiction isn't about the actual addictive behavior. So it doesn't matter if it's pornography addiction or sex addiction or alcohol or drugs or vaping or overeating or gambling or whatever it is. The addiction is about the underlying conditions that lead you to the addictive behavior. And instead of dealing with life on life's terms, the addict will turn to addiction to numb out any feelings of sadness, loneliness, boredom, overwhelm, discouragement, any kind of discomfort in life. My husband and so many other addicts have learned to numb out those feelings with their drug of choice. And this is what the White Book says, which my husband gained a lot of wisdom and understanding from studying the White Book, and he recommends that really strongly to anyone who is also struggling. And it says, the sexaholic has taken himself or herself out of the whole context of what is right or wrong. He or she has lost control, no longer has the power of choice, and is not free to stop. And if you take anything from this today, I hope you will remember this one thing, because this was one of the most important things, one of the biggest aha moments to me, being in a relationship and married to a pornography addict, is that addiction is pain management. It is not personal. And if you are someone who's in here in a relationship with someone who has a pornography addiction, it is not because you're not attractive enough. It's not because you're not exciting enough. It's not because your intimacy isn't good enough. It's not because they just aren't attracted to you anymore. It is because there is a hole inside that they're trying to fill. And it's an insatiable, empty hole that it doesn't matter how much you shovel into that hole, it's never going to be filled. But it's not because of you. It's not because they are unsatisfied with you. It's because there's a hole inside of themselves. So that's one of the most important things that I hope you will remember, is that it's not personal and it's not about you. And this took me a long time to learn that it also was not my job to fix my husband. But I thought, I'm going to be his savior. I'm going to fix him. And this is why I ended up with him, because I'm supposed to fix him. I'm supposed to save him. I'm supposed to go out and find something that's going to be the cure. So we tried everything. And when I say we tried everything seriously, we tried individual therapy and couples therapy and group therapy and outpatient rehab and so many things. And some of them would work for a minute, right? Neil would get a little bit of traction, a few days, a couple weeks, at the most a month or two, and then he would fall again. And it was just a constant roller coaster of, white knuckle, and then release and hours of pornography use and wreaking havoc in all areas of his life, right? So when I thought it was my job, it was also because I didn't want to be irrelevant. And a lot of these things I didn't understand. It took me a while to figure out why I was doing these things, why I was trying so hard to caretake and to fix him. But this is really beautifully explained by Claire Fontaine when she says, caretaking is never about the other person. It's about wanting to feel needed because you're afraid you're not wanted. And I felt this way all the time, where I thought, if my husband loved me, then he wouldn't do this. And so I've got to fix something about me in order to make him feel like he doesn't need this. But again, addiction is pain management. So it's really not about the other person not liking you or wanting to be with you. It's about something missing inside of them. So when we went to outpatient rehab, we learned about this concept of powerlessness, and I hated this. Not only did I hate this, I kind of thought it was a joke, like an excuse. But powerlessness is the concept that an addict has given in to their addiction so many times that they no longer have the option to choose. This is what I was taught, but it's not what I believed. I just would say to my husband, if you really loved me, you would stop. And if you really didn't like it, you would stop doing it. I would tell him, if you stuck your hand in a blender and you didn't like the outcome, I don't think you would do it again and again and again and again. But I didn't understand this concept of powerlessness, that once you give in to an addiction so many times, you literally do not have the willpower that you once had to stop. And the White Book, again, explains this really well. It says, lust was our drug. We were addicted to the high and the escape it brought, allowing us to feel alive, but at the same time, enslaved by it. Like other addicts, we found that the drug stopped working and we were stuck with the pain and the consequences of our behavior, yet we could not stop using. And this is what I saw for years in our marriage. And for those who might be thinking, well, is this really, affecting just there? Is it just a behavioral thing, or, how deep does it go? There have been so many studies done on this, but Cambridge University published a study that said brain activity in sex addiction mirrors that of drug addiction. And I hope that this is a little bit of a relief to you and doesn't come as a shame to you, because for me, when I read this, I felt like, okay, I'm not crazy, because sometimes it feels like I'm married to a drug addict. It feels like when he's engaging in his addiction, that his personality changes. So to me, this was a relief to feel like I wasn't crazy, feeling like my husband's pornography addiction affected him the same way that a drug addict would be affected by his drug addiction. But anyway, a few years into our marriage, we moved to Southern California after receiving a really strong prompting that that's where God wanted our family to live. And this is my daughter, my oldest daughter, who's now 11. This is the first time her toes touched the ocean. And when we moved to Southern California, we were really struggling. Our marriage was on the rocks. We had barely enough money for California rent. Everything is double in California that it is in Utah. And we were in a sink or swim, do or die situation. There was no question about it. I wasn't sure if we were going to make it, but I knew that God wanted us to relocate, and I thought, okay, maybe this is going to be our fresh start. So my husband started going to 12-step meetings, and he found these meetings through our church, and this is at the bottom, a listing of where you can find those meetings, but you can also just Google 12-step addiction recovery meetings, or AA meetings, or SA meetings, or CODA meetings if you're a codependent spouse. There's so many different 12-step meetings, and they all come with the same core concepts that I'm going to talk about today. But he started going to these meetings, and he said, I'm really liking these meetings, and I think you're going to like them too, and I think you should come with me. And I was just like, yeah, that's not happening. I'm over this whole recovery thing. Like there is no recovery. And so if you want to go, great, I'll support you, but I'm not going. And he was like, okay. So he just kept going, and he would gently invite me again and again. And finally, after about a year, I was like, okay, fine, I'll go, but it's not going to work. And I remember going to my first 12-step meeting in Southern California and being so angry and so bitter. I had so many layers of ice around my heart. And I honestly walked into those rooms and thought, these are just a bunch of jerks that are ruining their families' lives and patting each other on the back and going like, hey, bro, did you have a hard week? Like, yeah, me too. It's fine. And I didn't have a whole lot of tolerance or love for anyone in those rooms at first. But what happened as I started to go again and again, as I started to develop love and compassion for the people in these meetings, and I started to hear them say the exact same words that were coming out of my husband's mouth, like, I want to stop so bad, but I just can't figure out how. And I want to stop hurting my family, but I don't know how to do it. Or I really want to choose differently, and I just can't. I can stop, but I can't stay stopped. I would hear other people saying these exact same words that my husband had been saying to me for 5, 6, 7 years. And they just hit different when they were from someone else, right? From someone that I wasn't married to, that I wasn't emotionally attached to. So I started to develop more and more compassion through other people's stories. And we like to say in the 12-step meetings that hope is hearing other people's experiences. And so that started to affect me. It started to affect my heart. It started to affect the way that I felt not only about my husband, but also I started to feel like I was brother and sister with all these people that I was seeing every week. And one of my friends in the 12-step meetings likes to say that it's like watching a Netflix series come unfold, where you show up to these meetings, and sometimes you come into the meetings and you meet people and they're in the middle of their season 5 and they've been going for years and maybe they've gotten some traction. And then you see a brand new person come in and you're in their pilot season, and they come in and they share their story and they're broken. And so you develop so much love for these people in these 12-step meetings because you see them and you see everything in their life unfold. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. But anyway, so I started to kind of like the meetings, these meetings that I hated at first. I started to love the people there. I started to even like look forward to it. I kind of didn't want my husband to know that I liked them that much, but I did. And I loved the people there. And I even started to fill out, they had like a 12-step manual. So I started to fill it out. And I had filled out step 1 and I was in the middle of step 2. And then I found out that my husband had been lying to me again for months, telling me that he was doing better, telling me he had had a good amount of traction, and it turned out he had been lying to me. And this relapse just about took me out. It blindsided me. It made me feel like I had been hit by a semi-truck in the middle of a freeway, and I was just laying there dead with nothing else to give. And I know that this sounds dramatic, but had it not been for my 2 kids, I would not have wanted to live anymore. And part of that was just so much pain, so many years of pain, and also feeling crazy. I felt like a crazy person. I never knew if he was telling me the truth or if I was living a lie. I didn't know up from down or left from right. And I just felt like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And so I called my friend, a good friend of mine who had told me about these 12-step meetings. And I just sobbed and sobbed to her and told her everything that was happening and how much hurt and pain I was in. And she said to me, Corrine, do you just need someone to listen to you, or do you want to do something about it? And I was like, I will do anything you tell me to do. And she said, okay, you need to do the steps. And I did not want to hear that because I was like, remember, this is his problem, not mine. This is not my problem. I don't need 12 steps. I don't need any steps. But I knew she was right. You know, when somebody says something to you and it kind of hits you and you're like, dang it, I know they're right. I knew she was right. I knew that I was at my rock bottom where I didn't have anywhere else to go, and I needed help getting out of that rock bottom. So, okay, I have a question for you guys. Does anyone know what this is by raise of hand? This little fossil. Definitely not someone who was 1 year old when I graduated from high school like she told me. Okay, one person. How about now? This is the original iPod Shuffle. And when I won this in 2005, I was Miss Provo. And I had just come home from a London study abroad, where when I was on London study abroad, I took my enormous stack of CDs with me. I'm going to show you. If anybody knows what a CD is and ever used one, then the picture on the right is giving you anxiety because you know that CDs, if you scratched them, they would skip. If you didn't have anti-skip protection on your little CD Walkman, then if you were sitting in a bus or a car and you went over a bump, your song would skip, right? And when I went to London study abroad, I took my very small allotted space, suitcase space, and I don't know, maybe an eighth of it was taken up by my brick of my CDs that were in this like heavy binder. And so they were heavy, cumbersome, super annoying to carry around, and super temperamental, right? If anyone ever used CDs back in the day. But when I won this little thing, this little iPod Shuffle, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I could carry this teeny tiny little thing around my college campus and listen to 1,000 songs in this one itty bitty teeny tiny little thing, instead of that huge binder of CDs. Instead, this little thing, and that it didn't matter if I had anti-skip protection or not. I could go running with this. I could go over bumps with this in a car. Basically, this little teeny thing was indestructible, and it just blew my mind. I remember how much I just felt like I cannot even wrap my head around how this thing is real. And this is exactly how I felt when I did the 12 steps. So I'm going to teach you how to remember the 12 steps with a little saying that a lot of people in all 12-step communities will say. So step number one is, I can't. Step number 2 is, God can. And step number 3 is, let him. So let's say it together. Step number 1, I can't. Step 2, God can. Step 3, let him. And so I started doing the steps, and step number 1 in the 12 steps that I did, and most 12 steps are super similar to this, maybe a little bit of variation in language, but they're essentially the same. So step 1 was, admit that you of yourself are powerless to overcome your addictions and that your life has become unmanageable. So for me, when I switched this just a little bit and I said that I was powerless to overcome my husband's addiction. Okay, everything I tried had not worked so far. I was powerless to take this away from him, and my life had most certainly become unmanageable. All of a sudden, this made a lot of sense to me. And Jamie Lee Curtis says, recovery is an acceptance that your life is in shambles and you have to change it. And, that was kind of my rock bottom, where I was like, okay, I got to do something else. None of this has worked, and I can't keep going unless something changes. So step 2 is come to believe that the power of God can restore you to complete spiritual health. And I actually love the AA step 2 even more, which says, come to believe, it says something like this, come to believe that the power of God can restore you to complete sanity. And I love that because it feels insane when you're in the middle of an addiction, whether you have the addiction or a loved one has the addiction. But again, I really struggled with step 2 because I was supposed to be on step 2 when my husband came out of the woodwork with his last relapse, and it blindsided me. And so I just felt like, how am I supposed to have hope? How am I supposed to have hope that any of this is going to work? But my very wise sponsor said to me, let's just move on to step 3. So step 3 is to decide to turn your will and your life over to the care of God, the eternal Father, and his Son, Jesus Christ. And again, there will be variations, but basically, step 3 in any 12-step program is to surrender. It is to give your will to God instead of trying to take it back. It says, I'm going to let God be in charge instead of me trying to take the wheel, and instead of me trying to be in charge of everything. And that's what I had been doing for so many years with my husband's addiction. I thought, if he would just let me decide everything, then our life would be great. But that obviously didn't work. And the actual only thing that worked for me was when I finally said, okay, this isn't working for me. I'm not in charge anymore. I'm going to let God be in charge. So when I went to do my step 3, I still distinctly remember getting on my knees and asking God to take away this heavy burden for me. Not to take away my husband's addiction, because I had prayed that prayer so many times and it never worked. Anytime I said, God, please take this away from him, that didn't work because he had to choose that and he wasn't ready to choose it. But when I asked God, please take away this heavy, heavy burden that I've been carrying of my husband's addiction everywhere everywhere I went. I imagined myself as this person that had to carry around 1,000 pounds of bricks, and the bricks would fall out from the bottom and the side, and I would trip over them, and I would stub my toe on them. And they were the first thing I thought about when I woke up in the morning, and the last thing I thought about when I tried to go to sleep at night. And they were what I thought about when I was trying to watch a TV show. And it was what I thought about when I tried to go to lunch with a friend. It was all consuming. It was an obsession, and I just couldn't get rid of it. And so when I got on my knees, I said, God, I need this to work. I need it to work, and I need you to take this away from me. And I will never forget how that felt, when it felt like Jesus came into my bedroom and took this 1,000 pounds of bricks away from me and said, you don't have to carry it anymore. I've got it. I'm going to take it from here on out. I'm going to take it. So the white book again, surrendering meant giving up trying to fix it ourselves. We had to stop fighting and start trusting that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We learned that in surrender, there is no victory. The victory over our addiction begins when we are willing to let go completely. And the other really transformative thing that happened when I did step 3, and if my husband told you his side of the story, he always tells this as a turning point for him as well in his addiction recovery story, is when I went to him one day. He was sitting in his office working, and I walked in and I said, I just want you to know, whatever you choose, I'm going to be okay. So if you choose to get better, great. And if you choose not to, that's okay too. I'm going to be okay. And it wasn't like a do whatever you want, like I'm fine, whatever. It wasn't an angry, bitter statement. It was really me saying to him, it's all you, dude. This is all you now. Whatever you want, whatever you choose, it's you. And I'm going to do me now. And the reason why this was a turning point was because I wasn't trying to control his addiction anymore. And oftentimes, ironically, when the codependent loved one gives the problem back to the addict, they are given the best chance of actually finding recovery, and a lot of times they'll take that chance. So if you're sitting here thinking, well, what if my situation's different than yours? What if I didn't know that I was marrying an addict? What if I have a child or a spouse or a loved one who doesn't even want to admit they have a problem? What if I'm the person sitting here who has the problem and I haven't gotten any traction? What if? There's so many versions of this what if. And this is what we call in recovery being terminally unique. And my husband so identified with this. When Satan tricks you into believing you're the only one, that your situation is so different, that maybe these 12 steps have worked for somebody else, but they're not going to work for you. Maybe some of these other solutions that the therapist and Elder Renland offered today worked for other people, but they haven't worked for you. And for my husband, he would say, I felt like the atonement of Jesus Christ shined on everyone else, but not on me. He would say, it worked for other people, and I believed it, and I had seen it work in other people's lives, and I knew it was real. But for whatever reason, because maybe I had made too many mistakes or I was just too far gone, it worked for other people, but it didn't work for me. That's what he would say. And again, this terminally unique situation that went on in his mind and maybe going on in so many of yours, it is not a thing. Satan wants you to think it's a thing, but it is not a thing. I heard a wise man say recently that God is in relentless pursuit of you. And I loved that so much. And forgive me if this is not your Jesus, but for me, The Chosen has been one of the greatest opportunities for me to connect with a real Jesus. And so I'm going to take even a little liberty on that saying that I heard recently and say that Jesus is in relentless pursuit of you. He wants to help you. And it doesn't matter if you are the person struggling with pornography addiction or if you love someone who's struggling. And for me, one of the most powerful lessons that I learned in partnering with Jesus was that I didn't have to wait for my husband to be ready to get better, for me to get better, for me to gain peace and hope, and for me to feel happy, to wake up and not feel like all right, here's another day, pick up all the bricks, walk around with them, try to get other things done while you're distracted by this humongous problem. Remember, I gave it to Jesus. I gave it away. I gave up trying to carry it around and fix it and be responsible for it anymore. I knew it was not mine to carry, and when I partnered with Jesus, I found that he had been in relentless pursuit of me and that he wanted to help me, but I had to be ready for him to help me and not for him to infringe upon someone else's agency, not for him to deliver some miracle that I had made up in my mind that one day my husband was going to wake up and not be tempted by pornography anymore. When I decided to partner with Jesus on my peace and my happiness, he gave it to me. And I promise you that he is in relentless pursuit of you as well. He wants to help you, but you have to choose. God doesn't put limitations on us. We only put limitations on ourselves. So I want to testify of some of the miracles that I've seen from people who work the 12 steps in whatever setting that they work these 12 steps. But I have seen them work over and over again for people. I have seen so many people come in at rock bottom where they have lost everything. They have lost their wife, they've lost their house, they've lost their job, they've lost their family, they've lost maybe membership in a church, they've lost so many things, and they come in the depths of despair, and they are so broken, and that pilot season is hard to watch. But what happens when they keep coming to the meetings is what we like to say, a country song played backwards. They start getting everything back. They get their wife back. They get their horse back. They get their house back. And they get their life back. But here's where the miracle comes in. The miracle is that every time I see this happen, and I have seen it literally dozens of times with people who I develop such a deep love for because we go to these meetings and I see their Netflix story unfold over, several seasons. What I see is when it comes back, it never comes back quite the same. It always comes back so much better than it ever was before and so much better than they ever would have dreamed of for themselves, because that is how God works. He's just waiting to give us so much help and so many blessings. But again, he doesn't limit us. We put those limitations on ourselves. And when we decide to partner with God, he's just willing to give us so much help and so many good things. And these are the miracles that I see when people get everything back that they lost and then some. And then some. I promise you, that's what happens every time when they decide to let Jesus take over or their higher power in whatever form. And they stop trying to carry the 1,000 pounds of bricks all by themselves and they give it to their higher power. And this is what the 12 steps walks you through, is literally just giving the problem over to God and then learning to make amends and change your character. And you don't change your character from willpower. You don't change it by thinking certain things. You change it through your higher power. You change it through the power of God. And I want to testify also of the atonement of Jesus Christ, because this is the higher power that I worked with. And I can testify to you that the atonement of Jesus Christ is not some cute little fairy tale bedtime story that we tell our kids because it sounds nice. The atonement of Jesus Christ changed my life. Jesus came into my life and he took those bricks away from me and he made it possible for me to be happy and to feel joy that I never thought was possible. I really had thought, okay, this is the lot that I chose in life. And it's only going to get so good. And then once I decided to surrender everything, not just some things, not most things, but everything to Jesus Christ, he came in and showed me how much he had for me if I was just willing to trust him completely. Not trust him mostly, but trust him completely. And that the atonement of Jesus Christ has not only changed my life, but it's also changed my husband's life and so many other people's lives who I know and now love so much because of those weekly Netflix meetings. The atonement of Jesus Christ is everything, and it has the power to save every one of us. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. And I'm happy to take questions for a few minutes. Oh, we have 5 minutes if there's any questions. And I'll go to this. Oh, and there's a quote that I missed, but if you want any of the slides. And then if there's any questions, great. If not, that's okay too. Yes.
Can we bring you a mic?
Oh, yeah. They want to bring you a mic.
Who had the question?
I'm just wanting to ask a question concerning sexual expectations that a person may have because of their porn use, and if that was something that you dealt with and how you were able to work through that with your husband.
Yeah, and it's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it because I think this is one of the things that they're not going to teach you in 12-step meetings, right? 12-step for us was where we found solution to the problem of addiction. But when it comes to these nuances that are really difficult, I think that's where if you can work with a therapist or you can work with someone who is credentialed or licensed or has experience and also who can just create some understanding for both parties, then I think that's been really helpful for us to have a third party who can explain, this is how he's feeling, this is how she's feeling. Let's come up with some things that create safety or that, make sense to both people, that everyone feels like they're being heard. So I don't know if that's answering your question directly, but I think that because every situation is different, maybe the level of pornography use or how it affected people, just like they talked about earlier today on the panel, every spouse of a recovering pornography addict is going to be affected differently. So maybe what's triggering or what is or isn't okay is going to be different for everybody. And that's where I think it's really, really helpful to work with someone who is a professional who can be a totally neutral third party and can see both people's needs and then help you come up with some good solutions. But I hope that's helpful. Does anyone else have other questions? Oh, do you want to okay, perfect. Melissa's going to bring you a mic.
You said your husband tried many different modalities, I guess, to try to overcome this addiction and finally fell on this one. I've got a patient who has tried the 12 steps and doesn't feel like it's for him.
Okay.
How do I circle him back around? Or maybe I should ask it this way. Did you feel like trying all those other things first made the 12 steps better?
Not necessarily. I think that what I would tell your patient is, and what we tell a lot of people is not every 12-step meeting is created equally. So a lot of times you have to try a few out to find a really good one. We're extremely blessed in where we live in South Orange County that there's a really strong ARP culture that exists within our church of all of these men who they came from an AA background. So they brought a lot of the AA 12 steps and traditions into ARP meetings where we live, and they brought in giving out chips and a focus on sponsors and making sure you had a sponsor to work you through every step. So we tried an ARP meeting here in Utah before we moved to Southern California, and it wasn't the same experience. We didn't have the same really powerful, amazing experience here in Utah at the one meeting that we tried that we've had in Southern California. So I would say to tell your patient to try several meetings and to just see. And that's what I've told even my own loved ones who have struggled with other types of addictions, where I'm like, go to an AA meeting, go to an OA meeting, go to, different meetings and see what resonates, see what works for you. And you might just find one sponsor that you really connect with at one meeting, or you might find a different group where the culture's just a little bit different, because definitely different meetings have different vibes, right? Some meetings are super strict with no crosstalk, and then there's other meetings where it's just feels more like a family and everybody's kind of open. So I really think that if you're going to have traction in the 12 steps, you might get lucky and find one good meeting, but a lot of times you have to try a couple out before you find one that's a perfect fit.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? Yes.
I just wanted to ask to see if because I know you talked about having a hole in the heart that he couldn't he had to fill that addiction. And I was wondering if maybe for the codependent or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
if you had formed some sort of hole yourself, and that at the end of the 12 steps, if you and your husband's holes were filled somehow.
I love this question. So we all have holes, first of all. We're all so imperfect and flawed, and we've all been hurt in different ways in our lives. And so the 12 steps, I mean, we didn't have time to talk through all of them, but I'll just tell you that, like, when you do your 4 and 5 and you write down an inventory of all of your fears, resentments, and misconduct, you work through a lot of heavy stuff. And the outcome of that, after you're done with step 5 and you tell all of that to someone, is a miracle in and of itself. How good. I mean, I have a friend who's a surfer who says that when he did his 4 and 5, he feels like someone ripped him out of a current that he just couldn't get out of, and he finally could breathe. And I felt that too in my own different way than he experienced, but the relief was the same after I did 4 and 5. And then 6 and 7, when you ask God to take away your character weaknesses, those are those holes again. You're asking him to take away, the things that have kept you from fully loving people. And then when you do an 8 and 9 and you go make amends to people that you've wronged, and you leave space to forgive others who have hurt you, all of these things, that this is like serious, deep work with like filling those holes in your heart. And then you live 10, 11, 12 for the rest of your life. If you take the 12 steps seriously, 10, 11, 12 are maintenance steps, and you do them every day for the rest of your life. And it has changed our marriage. It's changed the way that I interact, not just with my husband, but with every relationship in my life. And it is a design for life that has completely changed the way I see the world. So does that answer your question? Are there any others? Oh, we're done. Okay. All right. Well, if you have other questions, you can come up in the back and we can talk. But thanks for having me today.